A millionaire found 3 poor children in the rain. The next day, he was surprised when he discovered the secrets behind the children. The rain drummed steadily against the windshield, the rhythmic wipers struggling to clear the torrent. Outside, the world blurred into streaks of grey and silver under the dim glow of streetlights. Frank tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his leather gloves creaking faintly. The warmth of the car, the low hum of the heater, and the faint scent of fresh pine from the air freshener cocooned him in comfort. His mind wandered briefly to Catherine, likely curled up with her favorite book, waiting for him with the patience she always seemed to have. She'd laugh when he came in soaked, shake her head at his lack of an umbrella, and kiss him anyway. He smiled faintly at the thought. The city had emptied early, the storm urging people to their homes. Frank glanced at the dashboard clock, 8:47 p.m. Just a few more blocks, and he'd be home. His foot eased on the accelerator, cautious against the slick roads, when something caught his eye. A small figure hunched at the corner of a desolate street, barely illuminated by the flickering streetlight. At first, he thought it was a pile of discarded blankets, or perhaps a stray dog, but then it moved. Frank slowed the car, squinting through the rain-streaked window. A child. No, 3 children. One stood protectively, her form outlined in drenched clothing, clutching something tightly. He pulled to a stop a few yards ahead, cutting the engine as the rain pounded harder. His hand hesitated on the door handle. He wasn't the sort to pick up strangers, yet something about the figure, her stillness, the way she braced against the storm, gnawed at him. He stepped out, rain biting into his coat as it soaked him instantly. His shoes splashed in the puddles as he approached. "Hey," he called gently, his voice barely cutting through the downpour. "Are you all right?" The girl turned sharply, her face pale and streaked with water. Or perhaps tears. She couldn't have been older than 10 or 11, but her eyes were hardened, watchful. In her arms were 2 babies, their cries thin and pitiful against the storm. They were wrapped in mismatched blankets, the fabric sodden and clinging to their small bodies. "What are you doing out here?" Frank asked, lowering his voice to avoid startling her. "You'll freeze." She said nothing, her grip tightening on the babies as she shifted slightly, as if to shield them from him. The defensive movement struck him. She wasn't just standing in the rain. She was guarding them. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said after a moment. His tone was calm, deliberate. "I just want to help." Her gaze flicked to his car, then back to him. "We're fine," she said, though her voice wavered, betraying the lie. "You're not," Frank replied, taking a cautious step closer. "They're crying and you're shivering. Please let me help, at least get out of the rain." The girl hesitated, weighing his words as though they might tip into a trap. He waited, patient, his coat heavy with water. Finally, she nodded just once, a small gesture of reluctant trust. "Come on," he said, stepping aside and gesturing to his car. "It's warm inside." She adjusted her grip on the babies and moved toward the car, her steps slow and wary. Frank opened the back door, letting her climb in before closing it quickly to keep the rain out. The faint scent of damp blankets and baby powder filled the space. Frank slid into the driver's seat, glancing back. The girl sat stiffly, her arms still tightly around the babies. They had quieted slightly, but let out occasional hiccuping sobs. He reached to adjust the heater. "I'm Frank," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "What's your name?" "Judy," she said after a pause. Her voice was small, but steady. "And them?" he asked, nodding toward the twins. "Alex and Adam." Her arms curled around them instinctively, her fingers smoothing the wet fabric of their blankets. Frank nodded, not pressing further. The car filled with the soft hum of the heater and the occasional cries from the babies. Judy kept her gaze out the window, her expression a mask of quiet tension. She sat like someone expecting the worst at any moment. As he pulled onto the road, Frank couldn't help glancing at her in the mirror. There was something fierce in her small frame, a determination that seemed far too heavy for her age. He wondered where she'd come from, what had brought her to the rain-soaked corner, and what she was protecting those babies from. He didn't ask. Not yet. He knew better than to push. The rain lightened as they drove, but the weight inside the car lingered. By the time Frank turned onto his street, the twins had fallen into fitful sleep, their tiny breaths audible over the engine. Judy sat unmoving, her gaze still fixed on the passing world outside, as if she wasn't sure she could trust the safety of the warm car. When they pulled into the driveway, Frank paused before stepping out. "You're safe here," he said simply. Judy didn't reply, but her hands softened slightly on the twins' blankets. The house was warm and well lit, its polished floors gleaming under soft yellow light. The faint scent of lavender from the diffusers mingled with the aroma of fresh linen, a stark contrast to the rain-soaked trio Frank had brought home. Judy stood just inside the doorway, clutching Alex and Adam as if she expected someone to rip them away at any moment. Her damp clothes left a small puddle on the tile, but she didn't seem to notice. Catherine appeared at the top of the staircase, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the upstairs chandelier. Her hand rested instinctively on her rounded belly. The fetus is 7 months old, as her eyes took in the scene below. She descended slowly, her expression shifting from surprise to concern, and finally to something more guarded. "Frank?" she asked, her voice calm, but edged with hesitation. "What's this?" Frank closed the front door behind him, shaking rain from his coat. "I found them," he said, his tone measured. He gestured toward Judy and the twins. "They were out in the rain. I couldn't just leave them there." Catherine's gaze lingered on Judy, taking in her thin frame and pale face. Her eyes softened slightly as she noticed the tiny bundles in Judy's arms. "Are they okay?" she asked. "They're cold and wet, but they'll be fine," Frank said. He stepped forward, lowering his voice. "They've been through something, Catherine. They need a place to stay tonight." Catherine's eyes flicked to Judy again. The girl stood rooted to the spot, her small frame tense, her grip on the twins unyielding. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the faint patter of rain against the windows. "All right," Catherine said finally, exhaling. "But they need to get cleaned up, and those babies need to be warm." She gestured toward the hall. "Come on, we'll sort this out." Judy hesitated, her feet shifting slightly as if she might bolt. Catherine caught the movement and softened her tone. "It's okay, sweetheart. No one's going to hurt you here." Reluctantly, Judy followed Catherine into the living room. The space was cozy, with deep couches and a fireplace crackling softly. Catherine knelt by a large basket filled with blankets and pulled out a couple of soft flannel throws. "Here," she said, holding one out. "For the little ones." Judy blinked, her arms tightening around the twins for a moment, before she nodded and allowed Catherine to drape the blanket over Alex. The warmth seemed to calm him, his tiny cries subsiding into soft hiccups. One of the household staff, a middle-aged woman named Maria, appeared in the doorway, her brow furrowed with concern. "I'll get some towels and warm milk," she said, disappearing before Catherine could respond. "You have people here to help?" Judy asked quietly. Her voice was small but steady. Catherine glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Yes, Maria, and a few others. They've been with us for years." Judy nodded, her eyes darting around the room, cataloguing every detail. "Must be nice." There was no malice in her tone, but the weight of her words hung in the air, nonetheless. Catherine looked at Frank, who gave her a small nod before stepping away to call Maria back for assistance. "Judy," Catherine said softly, her voice gentle but firm. "Let's get those babies comfortable. You can stay here tonight, and we'll figure things out tomorrow." Judy hesitated, then nodded. She allowed Maria to take Alex and Adam, though her eyes never left them as they were carried into another room. Without their weight in her arms, she seemed smaller somehow, as though the burden she'd been carrying was the only thing holding her up. Hours later, after baths, warm milk, and dry clothes had settled the twins into restless sleep, Judy sat on the edge of a wide armchair in the nursery. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of a lullaby from a mobile above the crib. Catherine lingered in the doorway, watching unseen as Judy leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Hush now. Don't you cry." Judy's voice was barely above a whisper, her tone soothing but tinged with something heavy, almost mournful. She sang as she gently rubbed Alex's tiny back, her other hand resting protectively on Adam's blanket. Catherine stayed where she was, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. The sight of Judy, a child herself, yet so maternal, stirred something in her. She thought of her own mother, who had hummed the same tune when Catherine was a girl. But there was a weariness in Judy's voice that no child should carry. Judy's song faltered as she glanced at the crib, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. She shook her head slightly, as if to shake off the moment, and stood to adjust the blanket around Alex. When she turned, she caught sight of Catherine in the doorway. Neither of them spoke. Catherine offered a small, understanding smile, and for the first time, Judy's guard slipped just enough to let a flicker of trust pass between them. Catherine stepped back, leaving Judy to her quiet vigil. In the hall, she found Frank waiting. "She's tougher than she looks," she murmured. Frank nodded. "I think she's had to be." Catherine glanced back at the nursery door, her hand still resting on her belly. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. "For now, they're safe." And for the first time that evening, it felt like a truth she could hold on to. The house had settled into a soft quiet, the only sounds being the occasional creak of wood underfoot and the faint murmurs of rain against the windows. Frank found Judy sitting cross-legged on the nursery floor, a quilt wrapped around her small frame. Alex and Adam lay swaddled in their makeshift crib, their breaths slow and steady. "Can I sit?" he asked, gesturing to a spot on the floor. Judy looked up, her eyes wary, but nodded. Frank lowered himself carefully, mindful of the moment's fragility. "You've been through a lot," he began after a moment. "You don't have to tell me everything right now, but I'd like to know how I can help." Judy looked down, her fingers twisting the edge of the quilt. "It's not easy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know where to start." "Start wherever feels right," Frank said gently, leaning back against the wall. "There's no rush." For a while, the only sound was the soft hum of the baby monitor. Judy closed her eyes, drawing in a shaky breath before speaking. "It started with my mum, Sarah," she said. "She worked for this man, Gerald. He's rich, like you, but not kind. He's scary." Frank nodded, not interrupting. Judy's words came haltingly, but she pushed forward. "Gerald owns this huge house. My mum was his housekeeper, and she kept everything running perfectly. She said he liked things a certain way, and if they weren't perfect, he'd get mad." Her voice faltered. "Really mad." She glanced at Frank, as if checking whether he understood. His steady gaze encouraged her to continue. "There was a woman there too," Judy said. "Joyce. She was the maid. She wasn't like the others. She smiled at me and talked to me when I visited Mom at work. She was nice." Her hand stilled on the quilt, gripping it tightly. But then she got pregnant. No one said anything, but I heard them whispering. It was Gerald's baby. I didn't really understand at first, but Mum told me later. What did she tell you? Frank asked quietly. Judy swallowed hard. That Gerald was mad. He didn't want anyone to know. He wanted her to get rid of the babies before anyone found out. But Joyce said no. She was so brave, even when he yelled at her. Her voice broke slightly, and she wiped at her eyes. When Alex and Adam were born, Gerald went crazy. He told Mum to take care of it. I didn't know what that meant at first, but when I saw Mom packing their things, I knew. Did your mother say anything to you? Frank asked, his tone soft but steady. Judy nodded. She told me we were going somewhere safe. She didn't want to do it. She couldn't. She said she'd leave them at an orphanage where no one would find them. But she didn't want me to tell anyone. Her hands trembled as she tightened the quilt around her shoulders. We left that night. She told me to hold on to the twins to keep them warm. She looked scared. Frank's throat tightened, but he stayed quiet, letting Judy continue. On the way, her phone rang. It was Gerald. She didn't say much, just nodded and said, "Yes, sir." Then she told me to stay with the twins, that she'd be right back. Judy's voice cracked, and she shook her head. But she didn't come back. I waited for hours. The rain started, and I thought someone was watching us. I got scared, so I ran. Her shoulders hunched as if the memory weighed on her. I didn't know where to go. I just ran. Frank exhaled slowly, processing the enormity of what she'd just shared. "Judy," he said carefully, "do you think Gerald found her?" "I don't know," she whispered, "but I think he knows she didn't do what he told her. And I think she's in danger." For the first time, the veneer of control cracked, and tears welled in her eyes. She quickly looked away, her small hands brushing at her cheeks in frustration. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with fear and uncertainty. Frank leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Judy, we'll find her," he said firmly. "You're not alone in this." Judy looked at him, her expression a mixture of hope and doubt. "You really think we can?" Frank nodded. "We'll do everything we can. I promise." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, her grip on the quilt loosening just slightly. For the first time since she'd arrived, her posture softened, the weight she carried shifting just enough for her to breathe. The faint sound of footsteps interrupted the silence as Catherine appeared in the doorway. She glanced between them, her eyes lingering on Judy. "Breakfast is ready," she said softly. Judy hesitated, then stood, her movements stiff with exhaustion and tension. Frank rose too, offering her a reassuring nod as they followed Catherine to the dining room. As Judy walked ahead, her shoulders still hunched protectively, Frank exchanged a brief look with Catherine. No words were needed. He could see the determination in her eyes, a mirror of his own. This was just the beginning. The dining room, bathed in the soft morning light streaming through tall windows, was quiet, save for the occasional clink of utensils. Judy sat at the far end of the table, her small frame almost swallowed by the large chair. She ate slowly, her focus on the plate of scrambled eggs and toast before her, but her posture betrayed her unease. Frank and Catherine exchanged glances, both aware of the fragile atmosphere. After breakfast, Frank asked Maria to watch the twins while he pulled Catherine aside into the study. The room was lined with bookshelves and a large desk, its polished wood reflecting the sunlight. Catherine sat on the edge of the leather chair, her hand resting on her belly. "You're planning something," she said, her voice calm, but with a trace of tension. I can see it in your eyes. Frank nodded. We can't ignore this, Catherine. Judy's mother is out there, maybe in serious danger, and there's no telling what Gerald might do next. Catherine sighed, her fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. I know it's the right thing to do, but, Frank, I'm worried. For us. For our child. This isn't just some business deal you can fix with money or charm. This man sounds dangerous. He is, Frank admitted, sitting across from her. But that's why we can't leave it alone. If we don't do something, who will? Catherine studied him, her expression conflicted. Promise me you'll be careful, that you won't put yourself or us in harm's way. I promise, Frank said firmly. He reached for her hand, his touch steady. I'll make sure everyone is safe, including you. Catherine nodded reluctantly, her shoulders easing just slightly. What's your plan? I'm calling Henry, Frank said, standing. If anyone can dig into Gerald's affairs without raising alarms, it's him. An hour later, Henry arrived. A tall man with a lean build and sharp eyes, he carried himself with quiet confidence. He greeted Frank with a firm handshake and offered Catherine a polite nod before she excused herself, leaving them alone in the study. Gerald Armitage, Frank began, leaning against his desk. Have you heard of him? Henry raised an eyebrow. That depends. Are we talking about Gerald, the millionaire philanthropist, or Gerald, the man whose name keeps popping up in conversations no one wants to have out loud? The latter, Frank said grimly. Henry pulled out a small notepad and jotted something down. I've heard whispers, offshore accounts, strong-arming smaller businesses, even connections to illegal trafficking. Nothing concrete, though. He's good at covering his tracks. Well, he's crossed the line this time, Frank said, his jaw tightening. There's a housekeeper who used to work for him, Sarah. She and her daughter Judy are tied up in this mess. He ordered Sarah to dispose of his twin sons, and when she refused, things got ugly. Sarah's missing, and Judy believes Gerald is behind it. Henry tapped his pen against the notepad, his expression thoughtful. If Gerald's involved, this won't be simple. He's got money, power, and no shortage of people willing to look the other way. I don't care how difficult it is, Frank said firmly. We're going to find Sarah and expose whatever Gerald's hiding. Henry nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. All right, I'll start with his business connections and known associates. If he's hiding something, it'll surface. Good, Frank said, his determination unwavering. Let me know as soon as you find anything. The investigation began immediately. Henry worked methodically, combing through public records and business filings and whispering rumors in the circles Gerald frequented. The more he uncovered, the darker the picture became. Gerald's reputation as a philanthropist and businessman was carefully constructed, masking a history of coercion and illicit dealings. Henry found connections to shell companies, vague financial transactions, and individuals with unsavory pasts. Meanwhile, tension simmered in the household. Catherine watched Frank with a mix of pride and apprehension, her protective instincts heightened by her pregnancy. Judy, sensing the unspoken undercurrents, kept to herself, spending most of her time with Alex and Adam. Yet, despite her silence, there was a quiet strength in her presence, a resilience that spoke volumes. One evening, as Frank reviewed Henry's latest findings in the study, Catherine entered, her face calm, but her eyes searching. How awful is it? She asked. Bad, Frank admitted, leaning back in his chair. Gerald's involved in more than I imagined. If Sarah's caught up in this, she's in serious danger. Catherine sank into the chair opposite him, her hands clasped tightly. Do you really think you can take on someone like him? I have to try, Frank said simply. Judy and those twins deserve better than to live in fear. And Sarah, She risked everything to protect them. We owe her that much." Catherine was silent for a long moment before she nodded. "All right," she said quietly. "But remember what you promised. Keep us safe." "I will," Frank said, his voice steady. "We're going to see this through." As Catherine left the room, Frank turned back to Henry's notes, determination burning in his eyes. Somewhere out there, Gerald was hiding the truth, and Frank wasn't going to stop until he uncovered it. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the study where Frank sat, poring over the newest report Henry had sent. A glass of water sat untouched beside him, condensation pooling on the coaster. The findings were damning: unexplained cash flows, hidden properties, and a disturbing network of connections leading back to Gerald. But nothing yet tied directly to Sarah or Joyce. Catherine entered quietly, her hand resting on her belly as though the gesture might shield her from the weight of the conversation they were about to have. "Still no word?" she asked, her voice soft but edged with worry. "Not yet," Frank replied, without looking up. He traced a name on the paper in front of him, one of Gerald's known associates. "But we're close. I can feel it." Catherine moved to the chair across from him and sat down slowly, her movements deliberate. "You need to tell me the truth, Frank. How far are you planning to go with this?" Frank leaned back, his expression shadowed. "As far as it takes. You know that." Her jaw tightened, and she looked away for a moment before turning back to him. "And what happens if he finds out? If he realizes you're digging into his business?" "That's why we're being careful," Frank said. His tone was calm, but there was an unmistakable steel beneath it. "Henry knows how to work quietly. We're not leaving a trail." "But you can't control everything," Catherine shot back, her voice rising slightly. "You're taking on a man who clearly has no limits, Frank. What if he comes after us, after this baby?" Her hand dropped protectively to her stomach. Frank's face softened, and he reached across the desk to take her hand. "I understand why you're scared, Catherine. I do. But if we don't help Judy, who will? If we don't find Sarah, who will? I can't sit back and do nothing while they're in danger." Catherine's eyes searched his, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I trust you," she said finally, though her voice wavered. "But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let this consume you. Don't forget about us in the process." Frank squeezed her hand. "I won't," he said firmly. "You and our baby come first. Always." Meanwhile, Judy began to let her guard down, bit by bit. She spent her days helping Maria with the twins, her movements careful and precise, as though she'd been taking care of babies for years. Catherine often found herself watching from the doorway, moved by the tenderness Judy showed Alex and Adam. One afternoon, Catherine entered the nursery as Judy was bottle-feeding Alex. Judy glanced up, startled but relaxed when she saw it was just Catherine. "You're simpatico with them," Catherine said, her tone warm but tentative. Judy shrugged, her eyes on Alex's tiny face. "They need someone. They have you," Catherine said, sitting in the chair opposite Judy. "And now they have us too." Judy didn't respond immediately, but her lips twitched in a faint smile. "It's lovely here," she admitted after a pause. "Safe." Catherine nodded, her heart softening. "You deserve that." Judy glanced at her, her expression unreadable. So do they. For a moment, the two sat in silence, the gentle rhythm of Alex's sucking the only sound. Then Judy spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think people like you existed." Catherine's throat tightened, but she managed a small smile. "We're not perfect, Judy, but we'll do everything we can to keep you safe." As the days passed, Henry's investigation gained traction. He found records of a remote estate owned by one of Gerald's shell companies, tucked away behind layers of legal obfuscation. The property had no official occupants, but showed signs of activity, delivery, security measures, and odd financial transactions. Henry called Frank that evening. "I think I've found something," he said without preamble. "There's a place far enough out that it wouldn't draw attention. If Sarah and Joyce are being held anywhere, it's there." Frank felt a surge of both hope and dread. "How sure are you?" 80%, Henry replied. "I'll need to dig a little deeper to be certain, but I'd bet on it." Frank's grip tightened on the phone. "Good work. Keep going." "Frank," Henry said, his tone turning serious, "you need to understand something. If Gerald realizes we're onto him, he won't hesitate to act. You need to be ready." "I am," Frank said without hesitation, "and I'm not backing down." As he hung up, the weight of Henry's words settled over him. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about outmaneuvering a man who thrived in the shadows. And the stakes couldn't be higher. Later that night, as Frank lay beside Catherine in bed, he felt her hand slip into his. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy." Catherine turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "Just promise me you'll come back to us, no matter what happens." "I promise," Frank said, his voice steady. "I won't let anything happen to us." But as the darkness of the room enveloped them, Frank couldn't shake the feeling that the battle ahead would test that promise in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Frank, Henry, and Bruce, the trustworthy police chief, collaborate to plan a raid on Gerald's heavily fortified estate. What's the weather like outside where you are as you listen to this story? Leave a comment to let us know. The study was dimly lit, the faint glow of Frank's desk lamp casting shadows across Henry's latest findings. The atmosphere was tense, the air heavy with the weight of uncovered truths. Frank's eyes scanned the documents laid out before him. Shipping manifests, wire transfers, and property deeds, all linking Gerald to a sprawling network of criminal enterprises. Henry stood by the bookshelf, his arms crossed, a notebook in one hand. "Drug trafficking," Henry said, his voice steady but laced with disgust. "That's just the tip of the iceberg. He's also tied to illegal arms deals, money laundering, and a string of shell companies designed to bury his tracks." Frank exhaled slowly, his fingers pressing against his temples. "And Sarah? Joyce? Are they connected to any of this?" Henry hesitated. "Not directly, but that estate I mentioned, the one tucked away in the middle of nowhere, I'm almost certain they're there. Security measures ramped up recently, and deliveries have been made that don't match the property's supposed use." Frank nodded, his resolve hardening. "We need to move quickly. If Gerald senses we're onto him, he already does," Henry interrupted. "The man's not stupid. He started pulling back on certain activities. He knows someone's digging, and he's trying to cover his tracks." Across the house, Judy sat with Catherine in the nursery. Alex and Adam were in their cribs, their soft breaths filling the room. Catherine leaned against the wall, watching Judy adjust the twins' blankets with careful hands. "You're talented at this," Catherine said after a moment, her voice breaking the quiet. Judy glanced up, her expression unreadable. "I had to learn. When it was just me and them, no one else was there to help." Catherine's chest tightened. She stepped closer, sitting on the edge of the chair beside Judy. "It must have been hard." Judy shrugged, her gaze fixed on Alex's peaceful face. "You don't think about it. You just do what needs to be done." There was a strength in Judy's voice that Catherine couldn't ignore. A strength born of necessity, not choice. "You know," Catherine said softly, You don't have to do it all alone anymore. Judy looked at her, hesitation flickering in her eyes. I'm not sure I know how to let someone else help. Catherine smiled gently. That's okay. We have time. For the first time, Judy's shoulders relaxed, if only slightly. The walls she'd built around herself seemed to shift, just enough to let a sliver of trust in. In another part of the house, Frank and Henry were joined by Bruce, the police chief. Bruce was a man of few words, his presence commanding but quiet. He flipped through the documents Henry had brought, his expression growing darker with each page. This is enough to warrant a raid, Bruce said, closing the folder with a decisive snap. But it's risky. Gerald's got resources, and if he feels cornered, there's no telling what he'll do. That's why we need precision, Henry said. No leaks, no mistakes. We go in fast, secure the hostages, and get out. Frank leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. What about Sarah and Joyce, if they're there? They're the priority, Bruce interrupted. We'll extract them first, but we'll need more intelligence to ensure we're not walking into a trap. Henry nodded. I can pull the last few threads, get us a layout of the estate, and confirm the security measures. Frank's jaw tightened. Do it. Whatever it takes. Later that evening, Frank found Catherine in the kitchen preparing tea. She looked up as he entered, her expression softening when she saw him. But the tension in her posture remained. Is it happening? She asked quietly. Yes, Frank said, leaning against the counter. Bruce and Henry are coordinating everything. It's just a matter of time. Catherine set down the kettle, her hands trembling slightly. I'm scared, Frank. Not just for you, but for all of us. Judy, the twins, this baby. She placed a protective hand on her belly. What if something goes wrong? Frank stepped closer, his hand covering hers. I won't let anything happen to us. I promise. Catherine searched his eyes, looking for any cracks in his resolve. Just come back to me, she whispered. I will, he said firmly. And when this is over, we'll finally have peace. The next morning, Henry called with an update. I've got what we need, he said, his voice brisk. The estate's layout, the number of guards, their patrol schedules. It's all here. Frank felt a surge of both relief and anticipation. Good. When can we move? Bruce wants to meet tomorrow to finalize the plan, Henry replied. But we're close, Frank, really close. As Frank hung up, he glanced out the window, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. The battle ahead was daunting, but for the first time, he felt they had a fighting chance. Back in the nursery, Judy stood by the window, holding Adam as he squirmed in her arms. Catherine watched from the doorway, her heart swelling at the sight. Judy had changed in the short time she'd been with them, her edges softening, her fear giving way to hope. But as Catherine watched, she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm they were preparing for would test all of them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. However, after the planning step comes the implementation step, especially in the current situation. The black SUVs crept silently up the gravel road, their headlights off, blending into the pre-dawn darkness. Frank sat in the lead vehicle, his heart pounding in his chest. Next to him, Bruce checked his sidearm, his expression grim. In the back seat, Henry reviewed the estate's blueprints one last time, his voice calm as he relayed final instructions through a secure radio. Perimeter team, hold positions. Wait for my signal, Bruce said into the radio. The static crackled briefly, then went silent. The estate loomed ahead, a sprawling mansion encased by high fences and flanked by dense trees. Its opulence was evident even in the dim light, a stark contrast to the horrors it concealed. Guards patrolled the grounds, their movements methodical but relaxed, unaware of the storm about to break. 3 guards at the main gate, Henry whispered. 2 more by the east wing. Cameras on the west approach. Keep it tight. Frank's grip tightened on the edge of his seat. His mind drifted to Sarah and Joyce, imagining them somewhere inside, waiting, hoping for rescue. And Catherine. Her last words echoed in his ears. "Just come back to me." Inside the mansion, Gerald paced the marble-floored hallway, his movements sharp and restless. The room reeked of cigar smoke and tension. His paranoia had escalated in recent days, spurred by whispers of investigations and loose ends. He paused at the basement door, glancing down the staircase to where Sarah and Joyce were being held. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Gerald muttered under his breath before descending the stairs. His footsteps echoed ominously as he entered the dimly lit basement. Sarah was chained to a chair, her wrists raw, but her gaze was steady. Joyce sat nearby, her hands trembling as she clutched a blanket around her shoulders. Despite her fear, her presence radiated quiet strength. "Let us go, Gerald," Sarah said, her voice firm. "This will only end one way, and it won't be good for you." Gerald smirked, pulling a knife from his pocket. "You think anyone's coming for you? You think your little threats scare me?" Sarah leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "I'm not afraid of you. And when they come, I'll tell them everything, every crime, every victim. You'll rot in a cell for the rest of your miserable life." Gerald's smirk vanished, replaced by a dangerous glint in his eyes. "You talk too much," he growled, stepping closer. Outside, the team moved swiftly. The guards at the main gate were subdued without a sound, their radios disabled to avoid raising the alarm. Frank followed close behind Bruce as they approached the east wing. The tension was palpable, every step deliberate and silent. "Basement entrance on the west side," Henry whispered through the earpiece. "You'll have to breach it manually. Guards inside are minimal but armed." Bruce nodded, signaling the team forward. As they reached the west entrance, the silence was shattered by the sudden bark of a guard's voice. "Hey, who's there?" Before the man could react, one of Bruce's officers tackled him to the ground, a swift, soundless takedown. The team pressed on, adrenaline spiking with every second. Gerald's voice rose in anger, echoing off the concrete walls of the basement. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" he hissed, raising the knife. "Gerald, stop!" Joyce shouted, her voice trembling but resolve. She stood, positioning herself between him and Sarah. "This won't solve anything. Get out of my way, Joyce," Gerald snarled, his grip on the knife tightening. "No!" Joyce shouted, her voice breaking. "I won't let you hurt her." Gerald lunged, his movements wild. Time seemed to slow as Joyce threw herself in front of Sarah, the blade sinking into her side. She gasped, crumpling to the floor. "Joyce!" Sarah screamed, her voice piercing the air. Gerald stumbled back, momentarily stunned by his own actions. Blood pooled beneath Joyce, her breaths shallow but determined as she clung to Sarah's arm. "Don't. Let him win," she whispered. The sound of the basement door crashing open brought Gerald back to his senses. Bruce and Frank stormed in, their weapons trained on him. "Drop the knife," Bruce commanded, his voice like thunder. Gerald turned, his face a mask of panic. For a moment he hesitated, the knife still clutched in his hand. But the sight of Bruce's unflinching aim and Frank's burning fury broke him. The knife clattered to the ground as Gerald raised his hands in surrender. "Get him out of here," Bruce ordered, two officers moving in to secure Gerald. Frank rushed to Sarah and Joyce, his heart sinking at the sight of Joyce's pale face. "She needs help," he shouted, his voice cracking. Sarah's chains were quickly removed, and she leaned over Joyce, tears streaming down her face. "Stay with me," she begged. "You're going to be okay." Joyce managed a faint smile, her voice barely audible. "They're safe. That's all that matters." As paramedics were called in, Frank turned to Bruce. "We got them," he said quietly, but his relief was tempered by the knowledge of Joyce's sacrifice. Back at the house, Catherine sat by the window, her fingers wrapped tightly around a mug of tea. Judy sat nearby, her eyes fixed on the clock, her tension mirroring Catherine's. When the phone finally rang, Catherine answered with shaking hands. "It's done," Frank said, his voice heavy. "We got them. They're safe." Catherine exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "And you?" she asked. "I'm coming home," he said. "All of us are." The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the hospital air, cutting through the low hum of monitors and the hurried footsteps of nurses. Frank sat in the waiting room, his head buried in his hands. His clothes were still damp from the raid, his knuckles scraped and raw. Across from him, Sarah sat hunched over, her face streaked with dried tears. Her wrists bore faint bruises from the chains, but her gaze was fixed solely on the door leading to the operating room. Inside, the surgical team worked frantically on Joyce. The knife had pierced deep, and though she was still clinging to life, her pulse was weak. The blood loss was severe. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the door opened, and a doctor stepped out, his expression grim. He walked towards Sarah, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "She's stable for now," the doctor said quietly, his voice heavy with caution. "But the damage is extensive. We've done everything we can." "What does that mean?" Sarah's voice was hoarse, trembling. The doctor's gaze softened. "She's asked to see you. I think she knows her time is limited." The words struck like a physical blow. Sarah staggered slightly, but Frank was by her side in an instant, steadying her. "Go," he said gently. "She needs you." Joyce's room was dimly lit, the monitors beeping softly in the background. Her face was pale, her breathing labored, but her eyes lit up when Sarah entered. "Sarah," Joyce whispered, her voice weak but filled with warmth. Sarah rushed to her side, gripping her hand tightly. "I'm here. I'm right here," she said, her voice breaking. Joyce's gaze flickered to the ceiling before settling back on Sarah. "Are they safe? Alex, Adam?" "They're safe," Sarah reassured her. "You saved them. You saved all of us." Joyce smiled faintly, but it faltered as pain rippled through her. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering the last reserves of her strength. "Judy." "She's safe too," Sarah said quickly. "She's with Frank and Catherine. She's okay." Joyce shook her head slightly. "No, I need you to tell her." She paused, gasping for breath. Sarah leaned closer, tears streaming down her face. "I'll tell her anything. Just say it." Joyce's hand trembled as she clutched Sarah's. "Tell her. She's stronger than she knows. That she doesn't have to be afraid anymore. And Alex and Adam, they're hers now. She's their family. Promise me." "I promise," Sarah said through sobs. "I'll tell her. I'll make sure she knows." Joyce's lips curled into the faintest smile. "Good. That's good." Her eyes fluttered closed, her breathing slowing. The monitors beeped a steady rhythm, then faltered before falling silent altogether. "Joyce?" Sarah's voice broke, panic lacing her tone. No, stay with me, please." But Joyce was gone, her expression peaceful, her final act one of love and sacrifice. Later that night, back at the house, Judy sat on the couch, Alex and Adam nestled against her. Their small, warm bodies were her only anchor in the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Frank entered quietly, his face drawn. He sat beside her, his presence steady and grounding. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Is she—" Judy's voice was barely a whisper, but the question hung heavy in the air. Frank nodded slowly. "She's gone," he said gently. Judy's arms tightened around the twins, her small frame shaking with silent sobs. Frank reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "She wanted me to tell you something," he said softly. "She wanted you to know how strong you are, how proud she was of you. And she wanted you to know that Alex and Adam, they're yours now. She trusted you to take care of them." Judy buried her face in Alex's tiny shoulder, her tears soaking into his blanket. "I don't know if I can," she choked out. "What if I mess up? What if I'm not enough?" Frank crouched in front of her, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Judy, you've already done more for them than most people could ever dream of. You've kept them safe. You've loved them fiercely. That's what matters. And you're not alone anymore. We're here. All of us." Judy looked up at him, her tear-streaked face filled with equal parts fear and determination. Slowly she nodded. "I'll try," she whispered. Frank smiled, his hand squeezing her shoulder. "That's all anyone can do. And I know Joyce would be proud of you." The room was quiet again. The only sounds were the soft breaths of the twins. As Judy held them close, a new resolve began to form in her heart. Joyce's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. She would honor it by loving, protecting, and fighting for the family Joyce had entrusted to her. And she would never be alone again. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs, the tension palpable as the trial against Gerald Armitage began. Rows of reporters and spectators filled the benches, their eyes trained on the man seated at the defendant's table. Gerald's expression was a mask of defiance, but the strain in his clenched jaw betrayed his unease. For years, he had operated with impunity, shielded by wealth and connections. Now the evidence lays bare, his crimes, for the world to see. Sarah sat in the witness box, her voice steady as she recounted the harrowing events leading to Joyce's death and the raid on Gerald's estate. Her hands trembled slightly when she described the moment Gerald ordered her to dispose of the twins. "I couldn't do it," she said, her voice cracking but resolute. "No one should have to live in fear of a man like him." The prosecutor held up documents seized during the raid, wire transfers, contracts, and photographs of the hidden basement. "This evidence," he said, addressing the jury, "is not just a trail of greed, but of human lives destroyed by Gerald Armitage's insatiable thirst for power." In the gallery, Frank sat beside Catherine, his arm around her shoulder. Catherine's other hand rested on her rounded belly, her gaze unwavering as she watched Sarah. Beside them, Judy clutched a small toy of Alex's in her lap, her face pale but determined. She had asked to be here to see the man who had taken so much from her and her family. The most damning testimony came from Henry, who detailed the raid and Gerald's attempts to destroy evidence. His calm, methodical recounting of events left no room for doubt. When the prosecutor played a recording of Gerald's threats, captured by a hidden wire during the raid, a ripple of unease spread through the courtroom. "I'll kill them all if you try to stop me." Gerald's voice snarled over the speakers, sending a shiver through those present. Weeks passed as the trial unfolded, but the verdict came swiftly. On the final day, the judge read the jury's unanimous decision. "We find the defendant, Gerald Armitage, guilty on all charges." Gerald's face twisted into a smile, but it faltered as the judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. The courtroom erupted in whispers as reporters scrambled to document the moment. For Gerald's victims, it was justice finally served. Outside the courthouse, Sarah leaned against the steps, her body trembling from the weight of the ordeal. Frank approached her, his expression soft. "It's over," he said. Sarah looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's never really over, is it? Not for Joyce. Not for the people he hurt." "No," Frank admitted, "but it's a start." She nodded, drawing a deep breath. "Thank you, Frank." For everything. I don't know what would have happened without you. You don't have to thank me, he said. You're the one who showed the courage to stand up to him. Sarah managed a small smile, her shoulders straightening slightly. We all did. At home, the atmosphere had shifted. Judy had taken to sitting in the nursery late at night, holding Alex and Adam close as she whispered stories to them. Catherine often joined her, her presence warm and maternal. One evening, Judy looked up as Catherine entered, her face pensive. Do you think Joyce would be proud of me? Judy asked quietly. Catherine kneeled beside her, brushing a strand of hair from Judy's face. She'd be more than proud. She'd be amazed. Judy nodded, her gaze dropping to the twins. I want to be the kind of person she'd want me to be. You already are, Catherine said softly. And you're not alone. We're a family now. Weeks turned into months, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. Sarah started attending therapy sessions with Judy, their bond strengthening as they navigated their shared grief and healing. Frank and Catherine worked tirelessly to ensure Alex and Adam had everything they needed, from medical care to a future filled with love and stability. One afternoon, Sarah sat with Frank on the porch, watching Judy play with the twins in the yard. You've given us so much, Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't have to, Frank replied. Family doesn't owe. We support each other. Sarah smiled, the lines of exhaustion on her face easing slightly. You're a decent man, Frank. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Judy sat by the nursery window, the twins asleep in their cribs. She held a worn photograph of Joyce in her hands, her fingers tracing the edges. I hope you know, she whispered, her voice steady. I'm going to take care of them. I promise. In that moment, she felt a quiet strength settle over her, as though Joyce's love and sacrifice were still with her, guiding her. For the first time in a long time, Judy allowed herself to hope, not just for Alex and Adam, but for all of them. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the nursery, bathing the room in a warm glow. Alex and Adam giggled from their cribs as Judy crouched beside them, helping Adam stack colorful blocks into a precarious tower. She laughed when the tower toppled, Adam's chubby hands clapping with delight. Catherine stood in the doorway, one hand resting on her now flat stomach, a soft smile on her face. In her other arm, she cradled a newborn, wrapped snugly in a pink blanket. She's awake, Catherine said softly, her voice tinged with the awe of new motherhood. Judy turned, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the baby. She stood, brushing her hands on her jeans, and approached Catherine hesitantly. Would you like to hold her? Catherine asked. Judy hesitated but nodded. Catherine carefully transferred the tiny bundle into Judy's arms. The baby stirred, her small face scrunching momentarily before settling into sleep. She's so small, Judy whispered, her voice filled with wonder. She won't be for long, Catherine said with a chuckle. They grow so fast. What's her name? Judy asked, her eyes fixed on the baby's delicate features. Catherine's smile softened, and she glanced toward Frank, who had just entered the room, his hands stuffed into his pockets. We named her Joyce, Catherine said, her voice carrying the weight of the name, in honor of someone who gave us so much. Judy's breath caught, and she looked down at the baby with a new sense of reverence. She'd be proud, she said quietly, her voice steady. Frank approached, placing a hand on Judy's shoulder. We thought it was the best way to honor her, he said, and to remind all of us of the strength and love she showed. Later that afternoon, the family gathered in the living room. Sarah sat on the couch, holding a steaming mug of tea, her eyes bright as she watched Alex and Adam toddle around the room. Judy sat cross-legged on the floor, keeping a careful eye on them. Frank cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. Catherine and I have been talking, he began, his tone serious but warm. "And we've made a decision. We want to adopt Alex and Adam officially." Judy's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Really?" Frank nodded. "They've already felt like ours from the moment we brought them into this house, but we want to make it official, to give them the security and love they deserve." Tears welled in Judy's eyes, and she blinked rapidly, trying to compose herself. "They're going to be so happy," she whispered. "And there's more," Catherine added, her gaze fixed on Judy. "We also see you as part of this family, Judy. You're brave, compassionate, and stronger than you know. We'd love for you to see this as your home, too." Judy looked between them, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find the words. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "You don't have to say anything," Catherine said gently. "Just know that you're loved here. Always." Sarah smiled from her spot on the couch, her hand reaching out to touch Judy's shoulder. "They mean it," she said softly, "and I couldn't be more grateful that you have them." In the weeks that followed, the house was filled with the hum of life and love. Adoption papers were signed, and the twins became Alex and Adam Montgomery. Judy, while still close to Sarah, began to open up more to Frank and Catherine, accepting them as a second family. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Judy sat on the porch swing with Frank. The air was cool, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and pink. Alex and Adam were inside with Catherine, while Sarah prepared dinner in the kitchen. "Do you think we'll be okay?" Judy asked, her voice quiet but steady. Frank looked at her, his gaze filled with warmth. "I don't just think it, Judy. I know it. We've been through so much, and we've come out stronger on the other side. Together." Judy nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. Together. As the first stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Judy leaned back in the swing, a sense of peace settling over her. For the first time in years, she felt truly at home. And as Joyce's namesake cooed softly in Catherine's arms, the family knew that the bonds they had forged through tragedy and sacrifice would carry them into a future filled with hope and love. The garden was alive with laughter, the sound of children's giggles mingling with the chirping of birds. Frank stood by the grill, a spatula in hand, flipping burgers while the smell of sizzling meat wafted through the air. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow over the yard where Judy chased Alex and Adam around the flower beds. Their shrieks of delight echoed across the space, their little legs carrying them as fast as they could manage. Sarah sat at the patio table, a glass of iced tea in her hand, watching the scene with a serene smile. Beside her, Catherine cradled baby Joyce, who gurgled happily, her tiny fingers clutching at the edge of her mother's dress. The baby's laughter seemed to punctuate every conversation, a reminder of the new beginnings they had all embraced. "You've got quite the team here," Sarah remarked, glancing at Frank as he carefully arranged the cooked patties on a platter. "Teamwork makes the dream work," he replied with a wink, earning a laugh from Catherine. "Isn't that what you said during the trial?" Catherine teased. Frank smirked. "What can I say? It applies to burgers and justice." Judy paused by the picnic table, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. Alex clung to her leg, his tiny face flushed with excitement. "Are we going to eat soon?" she asked, her voice tinged with mock exhaustion. "Food's ready," Frank called out, waving the platter triumphantly. Catherine rose, settling baby Joyce into her carrier, and helped Sarah arrange the plates and cups. Judy guided Alex and Adam to their seats, their small hands reaching eagerly for the burgers that Frank set before them. The table was a lively scene, filled with chatter and the clinking of glasses. Sarah recounted a story from her time working with Gerald, her voice laced with a mix of humor and disbelief at the absurdity of his arrogance. You mean to tell me he actually thought gold-plated napkin holders would impress his dinner guests? Frank asked, raising an eyebrow. Sarah laughed, shaking her head. It was Gerald. Subtlety was never his strong suit. The table erupted into laughter, even Judy giggling as she nibbled on her burger. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Frank stood at the edge of the yard, gazing at the family gathered around the table. Catherine had taken baby Joyce out of her carrier, rocking her gently, while Sarah helped Alex and Adam with their ice cream cones. Judy sat cross-legged in the grass, her arms resting on her knees, as she watched the twins with a soft smile. Frank's chest tightened as he took it all in. The road to this moment had been long and filled with heartbreak, but standing here now, he couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. As twilight descended, Judy stood at the edge of the garden, watching fireflies dance in the fading light. Alex and Adam toddled toward her, their hands outstretched as they tried to catch the tiny glowing bugs. "Look, Judy!" Alex cried, his face alight with wonder. "They're glowing!" Judy knelt, cupping a firefly in her hands, before gently releasing it into the air. "They are," she said, her voice soft, "just like little stars." Adam tugged at her sleeves. "Do you think Mommy Joyce can see them?" Judy's breath caught, her eyes misting as she knelt to his level. "I think she can," she said gently, "and I think she's smiling at how pleased you both are." Frank, standing nearby, heard the exchange and felt a lump rise in his throat. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Judy's shoulder. "She'd be proud of you too," he said. Judy turned to him, her eyes shining. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," Frank replied. "You've given them so much love, Judy. That's all she ever wanted for them." The evening ended with the family gathered around a small fire pit, toasting marshmallows and sharing stories. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her face relaxed in a way it hadn't been in years. Catherine rocked baby Joyce, her heart full as she listened to the laughter around her. As the stars twinkled above, she realized that they weren't just a family forged by tragedy. They were a family built on love, sacrifice, and resilience. And together, they would face whatever came next. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.